Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 9th of August of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And I would like to remind you that yesterday the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, announced that the next week he's going to have a meeting with the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. The highly anticipated meeting between myself as the President of the United States of America and the President Vladimir Putin of Russia will take place next Friday, August 15th, 2025, in the great state of Alaska. Further details to follow. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And this morning, everybody in the world realized that Zelensky is completely unhappy with this situation. He's very unhappy because he understands that most likely if this meeting happens, most likely he will lose his power. And he's not ready, he's not agreed to give any square kilometer of Ukraine to Russian Federation. The answer to the Ukrainian territorial question is already in the constitution of Ukraine. No one will or can deviate from this. Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. So lots of statements, lots of talks, lots of rumors, but the most important event is just ahead of us. Today we have another meeting on the territory of London. This time we're going to see the meeting between the representatives of the United States of America, Europe, and Ukraine. And most likely this meeting will be split in two parts. The first part between J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States of America, and the rest of Europe, Ukraine, where J.D. Vance most likely will talk and will tell Zelensky and his allies about the plan of the President Trump, about what exactly is going to happen the next Friday, and most likely later, when J.D. Vance leaves the territory of London, there's going to be another meeting between Ukraine and its European allies, where most likely Zelensky, Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Merz will discuss what to do next. Ukraine has several options for this. First, they can accept the Putin-Trump plan. This is the first option, but in this case, most likely he will lose his power within 2 or 3 weeks. And another plan is to make another escalation somewhere along the line of combat contact. Very huge escalation that will completely ruin the negotiation process between the Russian Federation and the United States of America. For example, today we got very interesting statement published by the different authorities that head of Zelensky administration, Andriy Yermak, demanded that Ukrainian special services urgently carry out operations to change the information environment and discredit the upcoming Putin-Trump talks in Alaska. So Zelensky most likely will try to break the situation, will try to ruin this negotiation process, because as for now he is not ready for the end of the conflict. So the question is what Zelensky is going to do. Obviously, he can start another offensive operation deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, and if it happens, most likely this will happen somewhere in the northeastern part of Ukraine. Because, for example, today we got very interesting article published from the Klimovsky district of Bryansk region. Today, around 9 p.m. near the settlement of Maniev, Klimovsky district, Bryansk region, border guards discovered the Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group, presumably up to 15 people. The border patrol immediately engaged in combat, blocking the Ukrainian soldiers. The Ukrainians have seriously wounded personnel and is trying to retreat deeper into their territory. So the question is, what exactly was that? Just the regular sabotage and reconnaissance operation, or the Ukrainians were trying to check the situation along the border and to prepare another special operation with the purpose to enter deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation? We need to understand one important thing, that Ukrainians don't need to take under control territories as they took under control during the Sudzha offensive operation. If you remember that during the Sudzha offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to take under complete control over something like this, and that's ruined plans of 2024 of the Russian Federation. And that allows Zelensky to win some time before the military campaign of 2025. This time time, Zelensky don't need to take all these territories. The only thing that Zelensky need is probably to take several villages along the border, and this is going to be enough, because Russia and Putin himself will use the situation to stop the negotiation process and not to accept any proposal from the United States of America, because Russia will never exchange their own territories for, let's say, something along the line of combat contact, because nobody knows what Zelensky will demand for these several villages along the line of combat contact. So Zelensky most likely is going to do this, otherwise he gonna have to accept this situation. Another important thing that I would like to point to attention, that currently we're talking not about a peace agreement, we're talking just about the settlement of the conflict. We're talking about just a short period of time when nobody, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians, will attack each other along the line of combat contact, in the sky, in the sea, and so on. Of course, this small agreement could be ruined by any side in any time, and this is not going to be something like a huge violence of a peaceful settlement, but obviously both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, will try to stick to this agreement. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but one thing I can tell you for sure, that the next week most likely is going to be the hottest week since the beginning of the special military operation. Furthermore, the Ukrainians can counterattack or intensify their counteroffensive activities in the Sumy direction. And telling the truth, this is exactly what is happening right now. During the previous 24 hours, we got another batch of videos where we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions along the line of combat contact. Lots of episodes were recorded. And once again, I would like to remind you that something like this we used to see in the area of the settlement of Kondratyevka. First, the Ukrainians were concentrating themselves along the tree lines in the forest belts and so on, and then the Ukrainians began counter-offensive operation that led to complete collapse of Russian defense on Kondratyevka and Andreevka, and when the Russians were forced to fall back. The Ukrainians, during the first wave of counter-offensive operation, managed to restore control over those two villages. Now we see that Ukrainians are concentrating themselves exactly in this area between the villages of Mala Kachkarovka, Nova Sich, Krapivnisha. So Ukrainians most likely are going to use this foothold for further counter-offensive operation with the purpose to cut the entire Russian defense belt at least in two parts, and most likely we're going to see this the next week before the beginning of Putin-Trump negotiations. Anyway, if the Ukrainians and Zelensky doesn't have any possibilities to carry out something big that can ruin talks, obviously he will try everything he can to show that it's too late to probably erase or reject Ukraine, Zelensky, and his ideas. He will do everything he can. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that during the previous months, Ukrainians received some weapons, Abrams tanks, and many other equipment that they still haven't used along the line of combat contact. Lots of military experts are saying that Ukrainians have enough of forces to carry out limited offensive operation, which can obviously in the end, all in all, to probably even ruin talks between Russia and the United States of America. But there is another important thing that I would like to point to attention. If you remember, several days ago there was a very interesting article published from the Republic of Belarus, and the Republic of Belarus just several weeks ago adopted a law. According to this law, if anybody attacks the territory of the Russian Federation, this will be considered as an attack on the territory of the Republic of Belarus. So we can see very big and very interesting political games, and one thing I can tell you for sure, that if talks of the next Friday are ruined by anybody, then we're going to see completely different special military operation, completely different thing in comparison with what we can see right now. I believe that much more countries will be involved in possible future of war of the special military operation. Anyway, let's continue, and now let's move to the Kupiansk direction. And first, let's talk about the southern Kupiansk area, the Lyman direction, where the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. First of all, I would like to point to attention that the Russians managed to improve their positions along the northern part of the village of Nitrius. This information during the day was provided both by pro-Russian resources and by pro-Ukrainians. Pro-Russians are saying that the Russians secured the village of Nitrius and about to finish the battle for the settlement of Serednya. But based on this report, we are not adjusting the map, we are waiting for additional clarifications, and we had another video published, this time by the Ukrainian sources. And here we can see how the units of the 60th Mechanized Brigade were after withdrawing Russians, and this is very important, in the northeastern part of the settlement of Shandrigolova. So today, on the 9th of August of 2025, for the first time since the beginning probably of 2025-2024, we received first geolocation that confirms Russian control and the Russian presence on the territory of Shandrigolova. This is very important, as for now we can't tell for sure whether the Russians began assault operation or it's just another attempt of another sabotage and reconnaissance group to check the situation around. So anyway, this is very important, probably message to Syrsky. Let's wait and see, and if you ask my opinion, I believe that the battle for Shandrigolova either started or about to start. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians announced evacuation. Ukraine has expanded the evacuation zone in the territory of Donetsk region. Forced evacuation of families with children has been announced in the 19 villages in the northern part of Donetsk region controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine. So the Ukrainians are evacuating the Leman area, so everything from this side would be evacuated by the Ukrainians, which means that Ukrainians are getting ready before the battle for this territory, which is obviously going to start either in the latest part of August, or at the beginning of September. And furthermore, we are receiving more videos from the city of Leman of how the Russians are bombing and attacking the territory of this stronghold. So the storm of this territory is going to start very soon. Now let's talk about the Sivis direction, and this is, let's say, the southeastern part of the entire Lyman direction. And when talking about this area, first of all, I would like to point your attention exactly to this picture. Here you can see lots of icons of artillery strikes, of those flamethrower strikes, of FAB strikes, of FPV drone attacks, and if we go through the entire line of combat contact, starting, let's say, from the Zapari direction, you're gonna notice that when talking about the Sivis direction, we have the biggest number of icons and events that's been taking place since the have taken place since the beginning of the day, which means that the Russians are over concentrated on this territory, which means that the Russians are about to begin most likely their major offensive operation from the city of Lyman till the city of Siversk, and most likely this is also going to happen during the next week, because the Russians will also try to improve their positions before the beginning of talks between Trump and Putin. The Russians will try to have very strong positions, as strong as never since the beginning of the special military operation. So the President of the United States of America will have no doubts that he is doing a correct thing by signing this agreement with the Russian Federation, because the Russians will try to show that Ukraine doesn't have even a single chance to, probably not even, we are not talking about the borders of 1991, we are talking just about the current line of combat contact. So everything is very complicated, but once again we are waiting not for the first parts of the meeting in London between JD Vance and the rest. We are waiting for the meeting between the rest in the closed office, where they will decide whether to accept the proposal of the United States of America or to reject this proposal and to make another escalation of the conflict, which most likely will involve much more countries in comparison with the current situation. So let's wait and see. Nobody is going to stop during the next days before the beginning of this meeting. The Russians continue their offensive operation, but I would like to remind you once again, if Zelensky accepts this proposal, then Zelensky would be forced to fall back and to remove his forces from the rest of the DPR and Donetsk region. And I would like to remind you that this territory has the biggest and the strongest stronghold all over the entire territory of Ukraine. So basically the agreement is that Zelensky must leave the most powerful positions towards probably more unfavorable positions, and the Russians, obviously, if they take this territory without clashes, will have all chances to move further in the northwestern part, deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, without almost any probably resistance from the Ukrainian side. So the situation is very critical, and basically European countries, Zelensky himself, should trust Russia or something like this. Otherwise, there will be no peaceful settlement. Now let's talk about the Constantinoka direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of updates. The Russians obviously are getting closer and closer to the city of Constantinoka from the south, and today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the group of forces center, as a result of clashes, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Yablunivka. So this village was taken by the Russians a long time ago, telling the truth. 2 or 3 or somewhere in the middle of July, we got first reports about Russian control over the territory, but just today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed this information. The sources are saying that the Russians were clearing this area. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 8th of August of 2025. As you can see, there were several gaps, several gray zones or contested area, at least in the northern part, and the northeastern part used to be considered as a complete under Russian-Ukraine control, and today we colored everything under complete Russian control based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. So this is very important. Now we see no barriers for the armed force of the Russian Federation to move further in the northeastern direction towards the city of Constantinoka, which most likely is going to happen, and who knows, maybe the Russians will do this the next week, right before or during talks with Trump. Another important update is coming from the southeastern parts. During the day, some very reliable pro-Russian resources reported that the armed forces of the Russian Federation secured completely the village of Sherbinovka. So this village was taken. And you know, right before I started making this video, several more pro-Russian resources reported that this information was probably a few minutes ago confirmed also by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. So most likely tomorrow this territory will be colored completely in Russian favor. The Ukrainians continue retreating from this area. Currently they have control over just one village, the village of Kleban-Byk, but something tells me that Ukrainians would abandon this territory during upcoming night between the 9th and 10th of August of 2025. If we increase the numbers just for 3 days, we're gonna see that Ukrainians launched their evacuation already. For example, during the 7th of August of 2025, we got this video where we can see how Ukrainians were trying to use this small forest to the south of Kleban-Byk water reservoir for evacuation, and this is the only tiny road for evacuation, as you can see, that is under complete Russian fire control. So it's very difficult to use this road for evacuation. Later we got another video from the same area, and this time we can see 3 Ukrainian soldiers that were trying to evacuate themselves using small group, and the Ukrainians also were ambushed, and this time they were attacked by Russian FPV drones. And after Ukrainians suffered huge losses on the 7th and the 6th of August, they decided to change their tactics, and starting on the 8th and 9th of August, the Ukrainians decided to evacuate themselves using the northern road for evacuation. So, for example, during the previous 24 hours, we got these videos from this direction. Let's discuss them in details as well. Here we can see how Ukrainians were running away from the city, from the village of Kleban-Byk, using the northern bank of the reservoir, but Ukrainians were also ambushed by mortar and by artillery strikes and were destroyed. This group was destroyed. We will not watch the video till the end, but this is the result of the video. And here we can see another group of Ukrainian soldiers. This time we can see 3 Ukrainian soldiers that were trying to escape this cauldron, but they also were ambushed and captured by the Russians and attacked by artillery, mortars, and FPV drones. This group was also destroyed. So, as you can see, during the first days, the Ukrainians were trying to evacuate themselves using this road. The previous 2 days, the Ukrainians were trying to evacuate themselves using the northern one, but every single video shown us that Ukrainians suffered losses, huge losses, up to 100%. So this is a real cauldron without any chances for evacuation. Currently, we don't know for sure how many soldiers were encircled in the area of the Kleban-Byk water reservoir and in the village of Kleban-Byk, but most likely there are still several hundreds of Ukrainians that will try to escape this area during this upcoming night. And most likely the Russians understand this and they will attack Ukrainians with all type of calibers they have. And after that, the Russians will maintain the line and will begin the assault operation further in the northern direction towards the villages of Nilipovka, Plesheyevka, Ivanopolia. Now let's talk about the N32 direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. As you can see, the Russians stopped completely their offensive operation to the northeast of the city of Pokrovsk. We are talking about this red line. So we haven't received almost anything from this direction, and we haven't been receiving almost anything from this direction for the previous 2 or 3 days. But we received a lot of updates of how the Russians were attacking further in the northern direction. And during the previous 24 hours, according to different updates, the Russians improved their position significantly. Currently, the clashes are taking place for the next villages: the village of Rosin Yar, the village of Poltavka, the village of Novoshakhova, and the village of Shakhova. Furthermore, today several sources reported that the village of Zapovidna was taken by the Russians completely. And this is very interesting. We see that the Russians are not in a rush to take the Pokrovsk agglomeration completely. They believe that for them it's better to move further between villages and small towns to improve their positions and to encircle all the cities without any possibilities of breaking through. Ukrainians most likely suffer huge problems with personnel, so that is why they currently can't do anything with the Russian forces and Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group that develops their positions not just to the northeast of the Pokrovsk agglomeration but also on the territory of the city itself. During the previous 24 hours, the map has been updated according to video published by Ukrainian sources of how Ukrainians managed to capture several Russian soldiers on the territory of the city. So in this episode we can see 4 Ukrainian soldiers that were transferring captured Russian soldiers towards the mainland, and this episode took place exactly in between these buildings, which means that Russian control over the city of Pokrovsk is much bigger in comparison with the updates we are receiving from Ukrainian side. It seems that Pokrovsk is going to fall in Russian hands, obviously during the first part of autumn of 2025. As for the South Donetsk direction, the Russians are moving but very slowly. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The group of forces is continuing advancing very slowly, step by step, from one village to another, and pro-Ukrainian sources updating their map also in Russian favor. But today we haven't added anything to map when talking about adjustments, because everything that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources was have been already adjusted several days or sometimes even weeks ago. As for the Zaporozhye direction, currently there are very heavy clashes for this area. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians are attacking each other. Today, pro-Russian resources reported that Ukrainians using M18 road managed to attack the city of Kamenska and to enter its northern part and managed to dig in deeper. So this information was confirmed by several pro-Russian resources. At the same time, the Russians improved their positions and moved further deep inside of the city of Stepnogorsk. So close combat, face-to-face combat, and we have small adjustments in Ukrainian favor. In this video we can see most likely the results of these Ukrainian counterattacks when the Ukrainians managed to bring additional infantry, and then the Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainian infantry with artillery. And for example, when talking about this video, we can see the moment when Ukrainians using vehicle were moving towards Russian positions and how Russians were attacking Ukrainian armored vehicle on its way towards Russian forces. So we have proofs that there are very heavy clashes right now. The Ukrainians are trying to cut Russians in the area of Stepnogorsk. The Russians are trying to take under control at least the southern part of the city and to dig in deeper. So both sides most likely will intensify their activities during the next week before talks between Putin and Trump, and this is most likely. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.